Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a question that's been a real head scratcher for centuries.
Yeah.
Do we really have free will,
Mm.
or is everything predetermined? You've sent in some fascinating material on this, from like ancient Greek philosophers to modern day thinkers.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And I can't wait to dig in.
Yeah, this is a fun one.
So,
What makes this debate so interesting is that it touches on something we all grapple with, right? I mean, that feeling of making choices every single day.
right.
But then at the same time, there's this nagging feeling of,
Yeah.
well, maybe those choices aren't as free as we think.
Right. Like this morning, did I choose to have that second cup of coffee, or was it already decided for me by
Well,
the laws of physics and my caffeine addiction?
that's the heart of determinism, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The idea that every single event, even down to that second cup of coffee, is the unavoidable outcome of a chain of causes stretching back to the beginning of the universe.
Wow.
It's like a cosmic domino effect.
Okay.
And we're just along for the ride.
Okay, that's making my head spin a little bit.
Yeah.
So is this like a new idea?
Not at all.
Okay.
Think back to ancient Greece,
Okay.
to a philosopher named Democritus.
Hmm.
He believed that everything in the universe, including us, is made up of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms.
Right.
And these atoms, he argued, move and interact according to fixed, unchanging laws. Essentially, he was saying that the universe, at its most fundamental level, operates like a giant, intricate machine.
Okay, so if we could rewind the universe and play it back,
Mm.
everything would happen the exact same way. That's the determinist viewpoint, precisely. Now, fast forward a few centuries, and we encounter Spinoza, a philosopher who wove this idea of determinism into a system connected to the very nature of God. Spinoza argued, and I'm quoting here, "The mind is determined to will this or that by a cause, which has also been determined by another cause, and this again by another, and so on to infinity."
So he's saying even our thoughts are part of this chain reaction,
Yes.
going all the way back to, well, the Big Bang,
So
essentially.
exactly. Now, let's jump ahead a couple more centuries and talk about someone who really brought this concept into sharp focus. Pierre-Simon Laplace, a brilliant mathematician and physicist.
Okay.
He imagined what's become known as Laplace's demon, an intellect so vast that knowing the exact position and momentum of every single atom in the universe, it could predict the entire future with absolute certainty.
So in Laplace's view, we're basically just billiard balls on a cosmic tool table, our paths predetermined by the initial break.
Wow. Okay, so if Laplace's demon had a giant cosmic cue stick, it could just call every shot from the Big Bang to the end of time.
Right.
That's a pretty intense thought. But something tells me not everyone was on board with this whole predetermined destiny thing.
No, absolutely not. In fact, as you might imagine, this idea of a clockwork universe with no room for genuine choice sparked a whole lot of philosophical pushback.
Right.
Enter the champions of free will.
Okay, so on the other side of the ring, we have the folks saying, hold on a minute. We're not just puppets on strings. We make our own choices, thank you very much.
Exactly. And for many philosophers, this isn't just an abstract debate. It gets to the core of what it means to be human.
It's about moral responsibility, about our sense of agency, our ability to shape our own lives.
Right. You sent over some materials from Immanuel Kant,
Yes.
and he seems like a major figure in the free will camp.
Yes.
What's his take on all this?
Kant is fascinating because he argues that free will isn't just some, nice-to-have feature.
Okay.
It's a fundamental requirement for morality.
Okay.
He says that if we have moral obligations, if we ought to do something, then we must be capable of choosing to do it freely.
Okay.
Otherwise, the whole idea of morality just kind of collapses.
So it's like telling someone, you should really donate to this charity,
Right.
but they have absolutely no control over their money or their actions.
Exactly.
This should only make sense if they have a genuine choice.
Exactly. Now, Kant believes this freedom operates in a realm he calls the noumenal self. Okay, imagine it like this. There's the physical world, governed by those deterministic laws we talked about.
Right.
And then there's this other realm, the noumenal,
Okay.
where our true selves, our free will, resides.
Okay, so even if our bodies are part of this giant cosmic machine,
Right.
Kant is saying our minds, our capacity for choice, exists in a different realm altogether.
Yeah.
It's like a philosophical escape hatch from determinism.
You could say that. Now let's fast forward to the 20th century
Okay.
and bring in Jean-Paul Sartre, a philosopher who takes this idea of radical freedom to a whole other level.
This is where things get really existential, right?
Yes.
Sartre, the we are our choices guy.
That's the one. Sartre famously said, we're condemned to be free.
Right.
He argued that we have this immense, even terrifying freedom to define ourselves through our choices.
Oh.
There are no excuses,
Right?
no pre-written scripts.
Wow.
Even if we're influenced by our genes, our upbringing, or our circumstances,
Yeah.
we still have the freedom and the responsibility to choose who we become.
So for Sartre, there's no blaming it on a bad childhood
Yeah.
or a difficult situation.
Right?
We own all our choices, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Precisely. And while that can feel empowering, it can also be a heavy burden.
Yeah.
It means we are fully accountable for the paths we take, and that can create a lot of anxiety for people.
Right. Okay, so we've got the determinists saying everything's predetermined, folks, get used to it.
Right.
And then we have the free will camp firing back with, nope, we are the masters of our destiny, even if it's a little scary sometimes. So are we doomed to just bounce back and forth between these two extremes forever? Or is there some kind of middle ground here?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Because some philosophical minds throughout history have tried to find a way to reconcile these seemingly opposing forces.
Okay.
They call it compatibilism.
Compatibilism. So it's like determinism and free will going to couples therapy and trying to make it work?
You could say that. Yeah. Compatibilists believe that even if our actions are part of a larger causal chain, we can still be free in a meaningful sense.
Okay.
They argue that true freedom isn't about some magical ability to act outside the laws of nature.
Right.
Instead, it's about acting in accordance with our desires and intentions, even if those desires themselves are a product of our genes, upbringing, and all the other deterministic factors at play.
So it's like saying, okay, maybe the river can't choose to suddenly flow uphill, but within the confines of the riverbed, the water is free to flow however it will.
That's a great analogy. It highlights how compatibilism tries to find a way for free will to operate within a deterministic system.
Okay.
And one of the early thinkers who explored this idea was David Hume, a Scottish philosopher with a knack for cutting through philosophical knots.
I'm all ears. How did Hume try to square this circle of free will and determinism? Okay, I'm starting to see how compatibilism might, bridge that gap between free will and determinism.
Right.
But it still feels a bit like a philosophical puzzle to me.
Yeah.
How did Hume explain what it means to act freely, within those predetermined limits?
Yeah, so Hume argued that what we call free will is really about acting in accordance with our desires,
Right.
our internal motivations.
Right.
Even if those desires are themselves shaped by factors outside our control,
Right.
of our genes or upbringing,
Yeah.
the fact that we act on them willingly is kind of what matters.
So it's not about having the power to change the laws of physics or
Yeah.
rewrite our own pasts.
Yeah.
It's about whether our actions are a genuine expression of who we are,
Right.
even if who we are is the product of countless external influences.
Exactly. Now, let's fast forward a bit to another compatibilist, a philosopher named Harry Frankfurt,
Okay.
who developed this idea even further with his concept of hierarchical compatibilism.
Hierarchical compatibilism. Okay, that sounds a bit intimidating.
Well-
Can you break it down for me a little bit?
Think of it this way. We have different levels of desires.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a first-order desire,
Oh.
like wanting to eat that entire slice of cake in front of you.
Okay.
But then you might have a second-order desire,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
A desire about your desires,
Okay.
like wanting to be the kind of person who resists cake and eats healthy.
You're speaking my language.
Right, yeah.
That internal battle between the cake lover and the health nut is all too familiar.
Exactly. And for Frankfurt,
Yeah.
true freedom lies in being able to align your actions with those higher order desires.
Okay.
It's about your values, your long-term goals,
Yeah.
having the final say,
Right.
even if the initial impulses are predetermined.
So it's like saying, okay, maybe I can't control the fact that this cake looks incredibly delicious,
Right.
but I can control whether I let that desire dictate my actions or whether I choose to act in accordance with my desire for, health and well-being.
Precisely. And that's the essence of hierarchical compatibilism.
Okay.
It's about the freedom to choose what we value most
Right.
and let those values guide our choices,
Yeah.
even within a world where countless factors influence who we are and what we desire.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But here's a question that's been bugging me throughout this whole discussion.
Okay.
If we zoom out from the philosophical nitty-gritty,
Yeah.
what does all of this mean for us, practically?
Right.
How should we live our lives knowing that this debate about free will and determinism is still raging on?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And it's one that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries.
Right.
There are no easy answers. But exploring these different perspectives can help us think more deeply about how we understand ourselves and the choices we make.
For example, if we lean towards determinism,
Right.
does that mean we should just throw up our hands and say, well, it's all predetermined anyway, so why bother trying?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Even if our choices are ultimately part of a larger causal chain,
Mm,
we still experience them as our own.
right.
The feeling of agency,
Yeah.
of making choices that matter,
Right.
is a powerful motivator in our lives.
Yeah.
And who knows,
Yeah.
maybe embracing that sense of agency, even if it's an illusion,
Right.
is what allows us to participate in shaping our destinies,
Yeah.
however predetermined they may be.
So it's like that saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Maybe believing in our own capacity for choice, even if it's ultimately like an open question,
Yeah.
is what allows us to live like more meaningful and fulfilling lives.
That's a great way to put it.
right.
And ultimately,
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most important takeaways from this whole debate.
Okay.
It encourages us to examine our assumptions,
Yeah.
to think critically about what we value,
Right.
and to live in a way that aligns with those values,
Yeah.
regardless of where we land on the spectrum of free will versus determinism.
Well said. This has been an incredible deep dive
Yeah.
exploring this age-old philosophical puzzle.
Yeah, it's a goodie.
And to our listeners, we hope this conversation has given you some food for thought,
Right.
some new perspectives to consider
Yeah.
as you navigate the complexities of your own lives and the choices you make each day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
After all, it's in the space between those two seemingly opposing forces,
Right.
between the pull of determinism and the allure of free will,
Yeah.
that we find the real beauty and complexity of the human experience.
This has been a truly fascinating exploration. Until next time, keep questioning,
Yeah,
keep exploring,
absolutely.
and we'll be here to dive deep with you again soon.